Yesterday I used my pop bottles to make music, and today I think I'm just going to have a drink. So I'm going to pour myself a... What? You can have 0.5 of a cup or 1/4 of a cup. Well, that's a strange sign. Oh well, it's not as if it's important. I mean, anyone can leave a sticky note. It doesn't really matter. I don't really... Obey or you will be cursed. Ugh. I don't want to take my chances on that one. I better figure out if I want, what was it? 0.5 of a cup or 1/4 of a cup. It's kind of confusing because 0.5 is written in decimals that are in the tenths place, but 1/4 is not written in tenths, it's written in quarters. How am I supposed to figure out which one's more? I'm pretty thirsty. I want the one that's more. I have to figure out equivalent fractions so that I can find the equivalent decimals and the equivalent fractions for the different ways it's represented, and then find out which one's more. I'm going to do that so I can get something to drink. Let's start with our grid here. We can see that it's broken into 100 pieces, and 50 of them are filled with a cola soft drink. So if I were to represent that as a fraction, I would say it's 50 hundredths. How else could I represent this? Instead of looking at each individual piece, I could look at the rows, right? I could say there are 10 rows, and how many of them are filled in with soft drink? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 out of 10 rows. How else could I look at this? I could look at the white chunk at the top and the cola chunk at the bottom, and I could say they're about the same size. They're equal size, in fact. So there are 2 equal size pieces, and one of them is filled with cola. 1 out of 2, that's 1/2. So you can see I've represented this in 3 different ways, and they all are equivalent. What's neat about this is that now I know that 1/2 can be represented in hundredths as 50 hundredths, and that's something useful to remember when I'm comparing other fractions and other decimals. What other important fractions should I know about? I think you should know about 20 hundredths, 25 hundredths, and 5 hundredths. Why? Because they are fractions that you might see a lot of in life. 20 hundredths, that's the green one. On the left, how would I represent that as a simplified equivalent fraction? I'm going to do the same thing that I did with the Coca-Cola fraction. I'm going to take a look at the piece that's colored in, and then count how many of those pieces it takes to make the whole. So, how many is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 equal pieces. So I can also represent it as 1/5. What about the orange soft drink in the middle? How many pieces can I use of that to make the whole? 1, 2, 3, 4. So there are 4 pieces. One of them is filled in with soft drink, so 1/4. And finally, on the far right, we've got a red soft drink. And it's quite tiny. How many of those do I need to fill up the whole box? Let's count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. 20 pieces. So there are 20 pieces and 1 is colored in, so 1/20th. So what do we learn from this? We can see that 1/5 is the same as 20 hundredths. We can see that 1/4 is the same as 25 hundredths, and we can say that 1/20th is the same as 5 hundredths. What can we do with that? Now that we know what 1/5 is, we can pretty easily figure out what 2/5, 3/5, and 4/5 are. How do we do that? We just fill in the hundredths grid with fifths, and then count how many of the individual tiny pieces there are. Well, it's something like this. If one of these pieces is 20, how much would 2 of them be worth? We just have to count by 20s. So 2/5 would be 20, 40, 40 hundredths. 3/5 would be 20, 40, 60, 60 hundredths. And then how much would 4/5 be? 20, 40, 60, 80 hundredths. So as you can see, you just need to skip count by the numerator. Let's see another example. What if we're dealing with fourths or quarters? Well, we just need to skip count by 25. So 2/4 would be 25, 50, 50 hundredths. 3/4 would be 25, 50, 75, 75 hundredths. Again, you're just skip counting by the numerator, in this case, 25. And finally, let's look at 20ths. So we can see that 1/20th is 5 hundredths. So we know we're going to skip count by 5 to find the equivalent fractions for the rest of them. For example, 2/20ths would be 5, 10, 10 hundredths. Then 3/20ths would be 5, 10, 15, 15 hundredths. And finally, 4/20ths would be 5, 10, 15, 20, 20 hundredths. Let's see if you can do it now. I've given you some fractions with denominators of 4, 5, or 20. And all you need to do is find the equivalent fraction that has a denominator of 100. And you can do that, again, by skip counting by the numerator. I've given you a cheat sheet here so you know what the numerator is. For 1/4, the numerator is 25. For 1/5, the numerator is 20. And for 1/20th, the numerator is 5. So, skip count, figure out what the numerator for your new 100th fraction is. Pause to try that out. Press play to check your answers. All right, let's check your answers. The first fraction is 2/4. And the equivalent fraction for that is 25 hundredths, so we're going to be skip counting by 25. 25, 50. 50 hundredths. The next fraction is 3/4. Again, the equivalent is 25 hundredths, so we'll skip count by 25s. 25, 50, 75. 75 hundredths. In the bottom left, we have 3/5. The equivalent fraction for fifth is 20 hundredths, so we'll skip count by 20. 20, 40, 60. 60 hundredths. And then 4/5. Again, we're going to skip count by 20, 20, 40, 60, 80. 80 hundredths. The next fraction is 2/20ths. And the equivalent fraction for 1/20th is 5 hundredths. So we know we're going to be skip counting by 5. Let's do it. 5, 10. 10 hundredths. And finally, on the bottom right, we have 4/20ths. Again, we're skip counting by 5. 5, 10, 15, 20. 20 hundredths. Now that we know how to find equivalent fractions with denominators of 100 for both decimals and fractions, we can figure out the answers to these kind of questions. Which is greater? To figure it out, you need to convert each number into a fraction with a denominator of 100, and then compare them to find out which one's greater. Press pause to try it out. Press play to check your answers. Answer checking time. In the top left, we have 1/2, or 0.68, which is the same as 68 hundredths. Okay, so 1/2, using our cheat sheet, we know that 1/2 is the same as 50 hundredths. And then 0.68 is 68 hundredths, so let's write that as 68 with a denominator of 100. And now we can compare. Well, 68 is more than 50, so 68 hundredths is greater. In the top right, we have 3.7, or 3.5. Well, we know that 3.7 is the same as 3 7/10, but we want it in hundredths. So how would we represent that in hundredths? Well, 3 7/10 is the same as 3 70 hundredths. Remember, you just stick an extra 0 on the numerator and the denominator. What about 3.5? Well, we know that half is the same as 50 hundredths, so 3.5 is the same as 3 50 hundredths. Which is more? Well, they both have 3 for the wholes, but 70 hundredths is more than 50 hundredths, so 3.7 is more. In the bottom left, we have 1/4, or 0.23, and 0.23 is the same as 23 hundredths. But what's 1/4 the same as? Well, using a cheat sheet, we know that 1/4 is the same as 25 hundredths, so let's just write that. And 23 hundredths is the same as 23 hundredths, so let's write that. Now which one's more? 25 hundredths or 23 hundredths? 25 is more, so 1/4. And finally, in the bottom right, we have 3/5 or 0.7. Let's start with our 3/5. We know that 1/5 is 20 hundredths, but this is 3/5, so we're going to have to count by 20s. We're skip counting. So 20, 40, 60. 60 hundredths. And then 0.7. Well, 0.7 is the same as 0.70, and 0.70 is the same as 70 hundredths. So which is greater, 60 hundredths or 70 hundredths? 70 hundredths is greater. And that's how you can compare mixed fractions and mixed decimals, even if the mixed fractions have denominators that are not 100 or 10. Well, now I know what I need to do. I need to find equivalent fractions with denominators of 100 of the amounts that are listed on the bottle, and then I can figure out which one's more. Do you think the bottle will mind if I make changes to what's on the sign? Bottle, is it okay if I make changes as long as they're equivalent fractions? Yes. Okay, the bottle says yes. All right, in that case, I am going to make equivalent fractions. So instead of 0.5, I'm going to say that 0.5 is the same as 50 hundredths. And instead of 1/4, I'm going to say that 1/4 is the same as 25 hundredths. And now I can compare. Let's see. 50 hundredths or 25 hundredths? I think I want 50 hundredths of a cup. So that's what I'm going to pour. It's more. It's greater. 50 hundredths is greater than 25 hundredths. Well, that's a little bit more than I'm supposed to have. I'm going to put a little bit back. I don't want to get cursed. There. 50 hundredths. Well, now that I have the correct amount of liquid, I'm going to have a refreshing drink. And while you're doing that, I want you to complete page 232 of your Jump Math book, and then complete the quiz that happens afterwards. Hey, Mysterious Bottle, do you have a message for everyone? Aw, that's a nice thing to say. Oh.